Welcome to Commsverse. This session is called Better Meetings with Office 365, and today will be presented to you by Paul Robichaud. Paul, take it away, please.
Great, thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad that you were able to join me here, even though it's a little bit of a weird time because this is not the event that Mark and his team originally had planned, but it seems to be going very well so far, and I hope that you find this session as valuable as the other ones that you've attended earlier in the day. I want to spend some time today talking about how to make meetings better using Office 365 and Microsoft 365. This is really a little bit of a tricky topic because we all recognize that in general, if you can avoid having a meeting, that's the best thing to possibly do. Right? It takes a great meeting to be better than having no meeting at all. But in almost every work role and almost every organization, there are times when you need to have meetings. And so I want to try to focus on two things in today's presentation. One is helping you understand a way to think about meetings to help you get the best definition and scoping and content for each meeting that you are forced into scheduling or attending. Then the other is to talk about the tools that Microsoft gives us to hopefully make meetings more productive, more useful, quicker, but also less common. So let's dive in. I want to start with a couple of stipulations. The first is that I say that all of us will have to spend some amount of time in work meetings. The reason I have those phrases italicized is because there will be people who don't have any meetings ever, and there will be other people whose calendars are just completely jam-packed. There will be some people who have occasional meetings, some people who have daily meetings, some people whose work is almost entirely meetings. Some of us will have meetings for professional societies or activities, hobbies, clubs, things that our kids are doing at school and so on. But I want to focus on the fact that all of us in our work lives are generally going to have to spend some time in meetings. And so thinking about the meta issues around meetings, what is a meeting and why do we have them? What are they for? What makes a meeting good or bad? I put good and bad in quotes because really, when you get right down to it, these are subjective value judgments. This is like me saying that a tree is pretty or ugly. You know, there's no objective scale that you can use to rate trees and say, wow, this tree is a 10 and this other tree is a 3. But there are some things that I can hopefully show you or encourage you to think about that'll help you to understand what a good meeting looks like so that you can have more good meetings and fewer bad ones. So let's assume that number one or number 0, everybody wants to minimize the number of meetings they have to attend and organize. Then from that, it follows that even though we want to minimize that number, we can't minimize it down to 0 in most cases. So given that we can't eliminate meetings altogether, that leaves us with the idea that we want to minimize the number of meetings that we go to and have. And then for the ones that we do have, maximize their value. So how can we do that? Well, if we understand more about what meetings are and what they're for, then we can generally do a better job of knowing what a good meeting looks like. So let's start with a few invariants that I think if you polled 100 people, you would find these things are, if not universally true, pretty close to it. First of all, a meeting's got to be structured. So you go into a meeting with an agenda that says these are the things we're going to talk about in the meeting. And sometimes the negative agenda is just as important. These are the things we're not going to talk about in this meeting. If I go in to have a meeting to talk about my software development process, for example, I don't want that meeting to veer into a complaint about how we allocate vacation time in the company. On the other hand, if I go in to have a meeting about how we allocate vacation time in the company, I don't want it to turn into a long extended discussion about the Formula One season, right? So every meeting's got to have an agenda and scope and a set of objectives that the meeting is there to accomplish. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. The meeting has to involve others. And you would think this is self-evident, but you probably have all been to meetings where the purpose of the meeting was for someone to stand up at the front of the room and show off how much they know or show off how important they are, right? So if you have ever personally conducted a meeting like that, please don't do it again. But if you've had to go to meetings before, you know, if it doesn't involve other people, it's not really a meeting, okay? Real time. Now this is a little tricky. my team is spread across several time zones. So I have a team of engineers that I work with in Slovakia. I have a team of product designers and engineers that I work with at a couple of locations in the UK. Part of my US team is based on US Eastern Time. Most of it is in US Central Time. And then I've got a couple of people who are on Mountain or Pacific Time. So really, when you get right down to it, there can be as much as a 9-hour difference between Robert in Newport Beach, California, and Mikhail in Žilina, Slovakia. And so sometimes when we have meetings, they can't be real time because not everybody can be available in a core set of hours. But in general, if you're having a meeting, the point of having the meeting is for it to be real time and to have everybody able to participate at once. If you can't do that, maybe it's not a meeting, right? Maybe it's some other interaction model that we'll talk about more. And then finally, a meeting has to produce output. If you have a meeting and nothing happens because of it, it's like the old Zen koan about the tree falling in the forest. And does it actually make a sound? If you have a meeting and it doesn't produce anything and no decisions are made, you might think, well, okay, that meeting didn't leave any impact anywhere. But the fact of the matter is that every meeting you have, even if it doesn't produce any direct output, like a set of meeting minutes or a documented decision, it's always going to produce an implicit output. And that implicit output might be as simple and painful as this meeting was a waste of time, or I don't know why we always have these meetings to talk about topic X because we never decide anything. Okay, now I would love to tell you that Microsoft has tools to help make sure that never happens, but they don't. But it's important to recognize that one signpost of what makes a meeting is it has to have some kind of output, and that output should be defined as part of the objectives of the meeting. So why do we have meetings? Well, I mean, humans are fundamentally social creatures. That's really been driven home during these pandemic times when so many of us don't have our normal social outlets. But apart from that, the reasons why we have meetings fall into some pretty well-defined categories. Sometimes it's to spread information. Sometimes it is to collaborate and figure out how to solve a problem or to develop ideas. Sometimes it's to carry out a process. So for example, when I was in the Marine Corps, we had promotion boards where there was a well-defined process of interviewing someone and reviewing their service record to decide if they should be promoted. That could have been done individually with each of the evaluators working independently, but it was done as a meeting because it was done as a meeting. To confer, to build or maintain relationships. And this is an interesting one because in the business world, most of us don't think about meetings as being a vehicle for doing this. But that's exactly what a sales meeting is. When you sit down across from a customer in a sales engagement, you are building a relationship. You may also be providing information or developing ideas or so on, but there are lots of other contexts where building or maintaining a relationship is a secondary objective of a meeting, even though you may not think of it that way and it may not be written in the agenda. None of these reasons are bad. So what do I mean by that? Well, when Satya Nadella has a town hall for all of Microsoft's employees, he is informing people. He's not conferring. He's certainly not asking people for their input. He's saying, hey, this is the way it's going to be. But that doesn't mean that that meeting per se is bad just because he's only using it as a one-way channel. But it's important to understand what you're trying to get out of the meeting so that you know if maybe there's another way to get to your goal. So what makes a good meeting? So first, everybody in the meeting understands what the meeting is for and what its scope is. So no one comes into the room saying, I don't know why I'm here. I don't know what this meeting is for. Why are we doing this? The correct set of people are, and this is tricky because this is a tough combination. They've been identified and invited. They are able and willing to prepare for the meeting, and they're able and willing to participate in the meeting. Think of meetings that you've been to where the wrong people were there or the right people were not there. Okay, I'm going to make a decision about something, and the person who ultimately can make the decision doesn't get invited to the meeting. Can we make that decision without her? Well, maybe we could. It's probably not a good idea. If we make the decision without her, then we run the risk of making an ill-informed or incorrect decision. And if we have the meeting without the decision maker anyway, now we just wasted everyone's time in the meeting. Preparation is something I'm going to talk about more in a minute. And then, of course, participation. We've all been to meetings where you had silent Sam sitting over in the corner who doesn't say a word during the entire meeting. My argument would be that unless Sam is there strictly to absorb information from the other participants, maybe he should not have been there. Elon Musk at SpaceX and Tesla sent out a memo about a year ago that gave everybody in the company permission to get up and walk out of meetings that were not productive for them. In other words, and I'm paraphrasing, he said that if you go to a meeting and it's not giving you any value to be there, then it's okay for you just to get up and leave. And I thought, wow, who else would do that, number one? And second of all, it'll be fun to check back in a year or two and see if that cultural change has stuck. The meeting has to be run efficiently. Now, there are tons of books and courses about how to run a meeting and how to make sure that you get started on time and you use your time efficiently. I'm not going to try to teach you how to do that because, frankly, I'm not very good at it myself. The meeting's outputs are fit for purpose. If the meeting is to make a decision, did you make a decision? Does everybody understand, and is it documented what the process of making that decision was? Okay, if you are giving out information in the meeting, if that's its purpose, did you do that? In other words, given that the meeting is supposed to produce some kind of output, is the output good quality? And if it's not, then maybe that's a sign that the meeting process that led to that output was not good quality. So ideally what you want, you can sum up a good meeting very quickly by saying it doesn't waste the participants' time, and it gives you the output that it was supposed to. Now, Intel, the semiconductor company that you're all familiar with, used to put posters up in every conference room with a set of questions to ask for every meeting. And I reproduced the first 4 of them here because I think they are a really good summary to have in the back of your head anytime you're thinking about meetings. Do you know what the meeting is for? Do you have an agenda for the meeting? Do you know your role, and are you prepared? And do you know how and to whom the results will be communicated? So think about what these questions mean. If you walk into a meeting and you don't know what the purpose of the meeting is for, maybe that's a good sign it's not a useful meeting. If there is a meeting but there's no agenda, I mean, you can go through each of these questions in thinking about your own meetings and decide, hey, these would be useful if I start using them. Now, maybe they're not useful. Intel has moved away from that, but they still do a course called Effective Meetings that every new employee is required to take. And so you might have seen the header quote that I had on one of the slides earlier that talked about meetings as being a reflection of your company's culture. Intel, Amazon, there are other large technology companies that believe strongly enough in the value of systematically improving meetings that they require their employees to get trained and learn how to do that. Something worth thinking about for your own organization. Now, that's enough blah, blah, blah about meetings, right? I'm not a meeting consultant. I don't go around teaching people how to do stuff with meetings or about meetings. I teach people about Microsoft 365. So let's talk about that instead. That's going to be more interesting anyway. So if there are 5 things that we could potentially do to get better meetings, or that we could do with Microsoft 365 to get better meetings, what are they? Well, reducing the number of meetings we have in the first place, improving meetings that you own or meetings that you are scheduling and managing because you are the organizer or the responsible party, improving meetings that you go to, improving your meeting management. Now, this is a little tricky because sometimes you may be managing a meeting that you didn't organize. Maybe you are pinch hitting for your boss because she's out of the office. Maybe you are a process lead or a team lead or something who is driving a meeting to get a decision that your team needs, even though you're not the owner of the decision itself. And then finally, tracking the improvement or getting a feel for whether the changes you're trying to make your meetings better are actually working. So let's start by asking, are there ways that Microsoft's tools can help me lower the number of meetings I have? And the answer there, absolutely, 5-star yes. Now, process-wise, before you make a meeting in the first place, you should be asking yourself, okay, have I thought about the situation that is making me desire a meeting? And if yes, do I need outside input before I can make a decision or achieve the objective the meeting is supposed to deliver? And then if yes, does moving the meeting forward actually require me to have a real-time conversation? I used to think about this in terms of an in-person conversation, but of course now, since many of us are not able to meet in person even when we want to, it's better to think of it in terms of real time as mediated through audio, video, and text communications with teams. And then, finally, do I have donuts? So that was always an important determinant back when I worked at Dell. If you had donuts in your meeting, you were much more likely to get the attendees you wanted. Of course, we don't have a Teams way to give people donuts, which is a little unfortunate. So if we think about step one, right, Microsoft has got tools like Delve and like Cortex to help you do the research you need to do to decide, okay, what am I trying to accomplish and do I need a meeting to accomplish it? But there are many other sessions during Commsverse to talk about those specific technologies, so I don't want to spend time on them here. Instead, what I want to do is talk about your first sort of decision point. If you don't need real-time input from other people, then you probably don't need to have a meeting. Of course, if you don't need outside input at all, then clearly you don't need a meeting. There are at least 3 technologies that are worth considering using instead of a meeting anytime you want people's input, but it doesn't necessarily have to happen synchronously or in real time. The one I tend to lean on most is shared documents. So I've included, it's blurred, but you can still see a screenshot of a document where I've got a discussion thread with a few people who are giving me feedback in a marked up Word document. Now, this is nothing new, right? We've had the ability to use revision tracking and leave embedded comments in Word documents for 20 years, maybe. It's been a while. But the technology for doing it keeps getting better and better. So I can drop a Word document or Excel spreadsheet or PowerPoint deck in a channel or in a chat in Teams. Everybody can access it simultaneously and continuously. And everything that anyone does to edit the document is preserved for everyone else to see. Okay, so that's pretty neat. We didn't really have that same level of connectivity with Skype for Business. Then when you take that to the next level and think, oh wait, I can invite guests to collaborate seamlessly with me. And then when you think about what Microsoft is doing with the the document-based enhancements that are coming in future revisions of their UI framework, then it really starts to get sexy, because the ability for you to have a single object that everybody's collaborating on at the same time means that if you're doing that in the context of a meeting, then everybody can see and work on the same thing at the same time. Or if you don't want to have it be in real time in a meeting, you can still do it separately and get most of the value of a meeting without the actual meeting part. If you're seeking to get input, maybe you could use a poll or a discussion in Teams. There are a lot of organizations that find that Yammer is very valuable as an alternative to meetings, because you can have the sort of threaded, asynchronous Facebook style discussion where someone proposes or asks or gives information and then other people respond and interact. Those are things you could do in a meeting, sure, but maybe doing it in a meeting is not the correct way to do it. And you should think about that before you drive on and make people go to your meeting. So I have some bad news for you about this slide. I'm not going to talk about this at length, because these are generally not things that Microsoft can help you with. You need to be responsible for defining what the structure of your meeting is, making sure that there's an agenda, making sure that everybody understands what you're doing, why you're having the meeting, and make sure that you get the right people involved in the meeting, including encouraging or exhorting or bribing or threatening them to come to the meeting so that it is an effective and useful meeting. Okay, Microsoft has very little they can do for you there. One area where they can help quite a bit is with accessibility and inclusivity. It is especially true right now, but it has always been true. And many of us just have had the luxury of not having to think about or realize this. But it can be very difficult to participate in meetings sometimes, because attendees at the meetings face challenges in hearing or seeing what the speaker is presenting. They may have the common afflictions that we've all run into of poor audio devices or poor video quality. But when you think about the world we're in now, where very few people are going to be meeting in person. Everybody is going to be interacting with the meeting content and the other meeting attendees through a screen. We have to do a better job of making the meetings usable for everyone. And so Microsoft gives us quite a few tools to use in doing this. Now, I focus most of the discussion here on PowerPoint because in most meetings, that is the primary channel that people are going to use to present and display and share material. Now, you can see during this meeting, I have live captions turned on in this live meeting. So as I speak, because I am speaking standard American English, the captioning system is able to do a reasonably good job of capturing what I say and displaying it as text. Microsoft doesn't support as many languages as they need to, but they're working on it. So my first recommendation as a best practice is turn on live captions and use them in all your meetings. I have another best practice related to that I'll talk about in a minute. Microsoft has given us the ability to use translation in chat. So you can take a chat message that may not be in the native language that you're accustomed to speaking and have it translated from its source language into that native language. Again, machine translation is much better than it used to be. It's still not perfect. You're going to see a lot of odd or comical results, but it's getting better. Fonts, colors, and graphics. This is a really complicated topic, and I don't have enough time here to do it justice. But from a standpoint of supporting people who have visual difficulties, and just from a standpoint of not making your PowerPoint look like a ransom note, be conservative about the way you design slide decks. Okay, there's a lot, Microsoft and other people have got a lot of guidance about how to make good-looking slide templates that are easy for people to read. But one thing I'll mention, actually, never mind, I've got it on the next slide. Record your meetings. Okay, if you record your meeting, then people who need to go back and rehear part of it have that ability. That can be really important when you're dealing with people who have any kind of cognitive impairment or hearing difficulty. And it's a good practice in general because it helps preserve the result of the meeting, and it makes it accessible to people who couldn't join in real time. Then finally, if you have the ability to do so, use good noise reduction, audio sweetening. Make sure everybody has a good quality headset or speakerphone, good cameras if you're using cameras. One of the things we found very early on when people started being confined as a result of COVID-19 is how many people had just abysmal audio devices at home, if any. So if you imagine, okay, your job is being in meetings 8 hours a day and you're having to be in meetings 8 hours a day with a 480p laptop webcam and a crappy pair of plug-in headphones that you got with your kid's cell phone, you can imagine the pain that people felt doing that. So make sure that your users have the device quality that they need to be able to work effectively in a meeting space. So I mentioned this before. First, record all your meetings. Stream will automatically add closed captioning to your meetings, which is valuable because you can change the captioning language. So if you're not a native speaker of whatever language the meeting was conducted in, you can still get captions in your own language. Minimize the number of animations and transitions that are used. The PowerPoint accessibility checker will do a pretty good job of helping you spotlight places where you might be using an effect or an animation that is difficult or impossible for people who are using screen reading software to use. Use the View Color/Grayscale tab to change the visual presentation of your template so that you can see how that would look to someone who has impaired color vision. Now, those are purely graphical tips, if you will. There's another one just from an inclusivity standpoint that I think is really valuable to mention. You probably have all been to meetings where you had someone who was an overtalker, who would talk over other people or just jam the conversation with so much noise. It's very difficult for other people to make points. Now, I would love it if I could say that Teams fixes that problem, and it doesn't. But one thing Teams does do is it gives you, with the raised hand functionality, a very simple way to have every participant in your meeting give a signal when there's something that they want to add to the discussion. Now, here's the thing. Raised hand only does good if you, as a meeting moderator or conductor, pay attention to it and give the person who has raised their hand an opportunity to speak. So this is a case where Microsoft has done the work of giving us the button to push, but you, as a functional human being, need to pay attention when someone has pushed that button to make sure that everybody is having a chance to participate. Okay, just from a diversity standpoint, I can tell you, after we started to implement this at Quadratech, we found the quality of our meetings going up because of people who normally would be quiet or reluctant to speak up in meetings began to feel less inhibited, and they began to feel like the meetings were a more safe and open space for them to participate in. And you need that. You need to be able to get the best input that everybody in the meeting can provide. Then finally, as Microsoft starts to roll this out, use the noise reduction features that Teams makes available for meeting audio. This will help filter out people who forget to mute themselves, or people who breathe heavily into their headset, or people who are eating crisps during the meeting. It will help just remove background noise and make it easier for everybody, particularly people with hearing difficulties, to understand what the speaker is saying. By the way, some of you may be able to hear my cat in the background because there is no noise reduction for filtering out a noisy cat in Teams meetings. Maybe they'll do that in a future version. Okay, let's talk about meeting scheduling for a minute, because this is an ongoing problem, and this is one area where Microsoft has really done a good job of giving us a flexible set of tools. You really have three options when you are conducting a meeting and you need to schedule it. One option is you pick a time and you say, this is the time, and you can be there or not. I tend to think of this as a wedding model. I'm getting married on September 10th. And just to be clear, I'm not actually getting married, but I'm getting married on September 10th at 10 a.m. And you're invited, and if you can come, you can come. But if you can't come on that date and that time, too bad, I'm not changing the date. Sometimes you can get away with this, sometimes you can't. Option two is to ask the attendees to suggest times. This has a bonus, it's courteous and friendly, but if you have more than a couple of attendees, it doesn't often work very well because it's very difficult to get a group of people, especially if they're in different time zones, especially if they're in multiple organizations, to coalesce on one time. Option three is to automate this process, or to do the meeting scheduling collaboratively and let Microsoft's tools, if not do the work for you, at least make it simpler. So the good news is we actually have two ways to do option three. The first is called Find Time. Hopefully all of you have used this by now because it is great, super useful feature. It's shipped as an Outlook add-in and also works in OWA and on mobile, so that when you create a meeting invitation, you add the recipients that you want to invite, you pick some time slots that work for you, and as you'll see in a minute in the demo, Find Time will help you by giving you information about the attendees who are within your organization. And then you send out a poll. So the recipients all get a message inviting them to a meeting, and they can vote on the time. And when you've gotten a critical mass of attendees, then Find Time will schedule the meeting for you. This gives you the collaborative aspect that I mentioned on the previous slide. It does so in a really user-friendly way that doesn't require a lot of special training. Now, there's another option, and you will hear me, you'll hear me refer to this as Cortana or as Scheduler, sort of interchangeably. The product name or the feature name is Scheduler. It is a Cortana-based service that uses a bunch of Azure machine learning and natural language tools in the background to try to give you an automated chatbot, basically, for scheduling meetings. So the way Cortana works is that when you want to schedule a meeting, you compose a message in your mail client, and it doesn't have to be Outlook. This is the beauty of it. And you CC Cortana at scheduler.ms. Or sorry, Cortana at calendar.help. I forgot. And when that happens, your message will say something like, I want to have a meeting to discuss how we're going to improve our Q4 revenue. And here's the agenda. And you will say in the body of the meeting something like, Cortana, schedule a 45-minute Teams meeting for next week, or schedule a meeting on Wednesday or Thursday. There are a bunch of different utterances that Cortana or Scheduler can understand in terms of who is optional and who's required, when the meeting should be held, how long it should be, is it a Teams meeting, is it a recurring meeting, and so on. And what Cortana will then do as soon as it receives this email is try to pick times that work for everybody. Now, this is where the magic happens. This is a tenant level service in Microsoft 365. So if you're having a meeting that only involves people inside your tenant, very frequently Cortana will be able to find a time that works for everybody and it just automatically schedules the meeting. If it can't, then what it will do is it'll identify the times that work for the majority of people or the largest possible number of people, and then send a poll to people where it doesn't have that information. So suppose that I'm creating a meeting for 5 people, me, 3 people in my organization, and 1 guest. When I do that, when I send the initial request to scheduler, it's going to look at my calendar and my 3 internal users and try to come up with a set of times that will work. And then it's going to send a friendly bot message via email to the guest to say, hey, which of these 3 times works better for you? And then you'll also see in the message there's some help links and whatnot to help guide the recipient if she's never gotten one of these messages before. The nice thing about this is it's all done via text. It's very familiar. You can very easily do it one-handed with a mobile phone by tapping out responses in Outlook or whatever your preferred mobile client is. It doesn't require any web-based interaction the way that Find Time does. So first, I want to show you what Find Time looks like. So to do that, I'm going to go to Outlook, and I'll switch to my work tenant. And I'm going to create a meeting request. And let me just get rid of that because we don't need to see it yet. So I'm going to invite Find Time. I'm going to send a message to Mark Vale, yay Commsverse, and Martin, and my boss, and Vasil Michev. Now notice what happens when I tell Find Time that I want to create a meeting. It's going to give me this nifty little summary showing me who's free and who's busy based on what it knows. Notice that for all of these, Mark is shown as unknown. Mark's not my organization, and so we don't have any data about when Mark might be available or not. I can pick the time zone. I can constrain searching for times that are during work hours on my calendar. And I can say what day I want to put it on. So let's say that I want to pick these times. And there may be a time when I look down here and I say, oh, okay, Thomas is busy. Well, I can't have the meeting without Thomas. How about here? Well, let's see, I'm busy, so I can't have the meeting then. How about here? I'm still busy. Okay, Thomas is busy. So I can iterate through here and see what times might potentially work. So I'll pick a couple more times. Now, there's some settings you can change that you'll learn more about when you play with Find Time, but I usually use this combination. I want it to automatically schedule the meeting when it's ready. I want it to hold all of the times that I've proposed on my calendar as tentative so that nobody double books me. And I want it to be a Teams meeting. Now, here's the trick that differentiates Find Time from, or one of the tricks that differentiates Find Time from Scheduler. If I just sent this right now, with this crappy subject line, Mark and Martin and Thomas and Vasil would have no idea what I wanted. The meeting subject is Find Time Test, and there's nothing in the Find Time invitation itself that says anything about what the meeting is for or why they should care. So before I sent this, I would need to include and then I could send it. Now, I'm not going to send it because I don't want to be a pest. Now, I'll show you something similar with Cortana, although actually, given where we are in time, instead of in the interest of having time for Q&A, I'm going to skip that because I've got a screenshot that I can show you in a minute of Cortana. So let's pivot and let's talk about how to improve meetings that you attend. So Microsoft has done a lot of work at trying to get the idea of the intelligent substrate across to people. This is just a fancy word. The substrate reference is meaning all of the data that Microsoft has about every individual user, including all the files that she's touched, all the files that have been shared with her, all the meetings on her calendar, who she communicates with, and so on. And then the intelligent part means let's use Azure services or services in M365 to try to do something useful with all of that data from the substrate. So the Meeting Insights view that you see in Outlook Mobile is a good example of an intelligent service that can be provided based on data that the service already has. In this case, I'm looking at a meeting that Mark sent to Commsverse speakers. And you can see in this screenshot, the service has exposed a couple of related items that it thinks might be interesting. So one is a PDF document, one is another message. So I can tap on those in the client to be taken to them. There's related functionality that you'll see in my analytics, as I'll show you in a minute. But the idea here is before you have a meeting, or in your daily briefing email, which I'll also talk about in a minute, that you should be able to take a look at the material that might be relevant to a meeting so that you are familiar with what the meeting is about, what topics are going to be discussed, who the participants are, and so on, so that you will have a good experience in the meeting and be able to contribute to it. Now, Cortana Daily Briefing is another service that is being rolled out under the Cortana umbrella. This is actually really neat because there's a huge amount of potential in this implementation. The idea is that every morning when you log into your email client, you're going to see a summary about the meetings that you have that day. And that summary may include documents for you to look at. It may include tasks for you to complete. It may include links to people's profiles on LinkedIn who are going to be in the meeting that you need to familiarize yourself with, and so on. So in the same way that every morning when I wake up, I've got an email from the fitness service I use telling me what my day's workout is. I get an email from the daily briefing service. It tells me, okay, for the meetings that you have today, here are things that you need to know about, and there may be tasks associated with those. Now you can see here, this is actually formatted as an action card. So I can take action by clicking the buttons in this meeting, or sorry, in this email. So I'll show you what that looks like here. So you can see in my daily briefing email from yesterday, all I got was a task. Now it turns out this is not actually a task, right? I'm talking to my coach about running a virtual marathon because the Marine Corps marathon that I had signed up to run is almost certainly going to be canceled and I won't be able to run it. But you can see just from this review that I could sit down and say, notice it was sent at 4:14 a.m. So Cortana, the service, knows what my working hours are and it knows when I typically start to interact. So it's going to send me this briefing email before my day gets started. It's pretty useful. All right, let's flip and talk about meeting management. I love the David Allen quote that's at the top of this page because it's so true. People will try to use the tools that they have and they'll try to contort their workflow to take advantage of the tools they have, even if it's really a poor fit. So in this case, when you're managing a meeting, why anybody would use anything other than OneNote for tracking meeting minutes and actions and so on is just beyond me, right? I don't know. We've given that feedback to the Teams team several times as an MVP community, and they haven't changed it. They probably never will, but it's, you know, it's fun to hope. Think about whether it's appropriate for you to use live events as we're doing here instead of a traditional meeting. That may make it easier for you to manage the audience and to provide the right mix of content and services and interactions to people who are in the meeting. And then know and use the tools that Microsoft gives us for meeting admission control. You probably have all heard of Zoom bombing, which, you know, frankly, Zoom could have done a lot to solve that problem before it got to be so widespread or widely associated with them. But knowing, for example, what a guest user can and cannot do in a chat is really useful. As you may know, they can't react to messages or use @mentions to tag people when you're in a chat as a guest. If your users are expecting that, or if you depend on that as part of your meeting functionality for people to be able to @mention, knowing that that's not going to work is pretty important. Now, I want to just show this really briefly. I mentioned it on Twitter, and I think I got more likes than anything I've ever posted. I was playing with Power Automate for the first time the other day, and I thought, wow, wouldn't it be neat if I could come up with a way to automatically reject a meeting invitation that did not contain an agenda. And so I started playing around with it, and I'm not very happy with the results. There's a lot of work to be done here. What I've come up with so far, though, is using this flow. I get most of what I want. So if a meeting comes in, if it is from my boss or my boss's assistant, then I'm going to accept it, and then the flow is done. If it's not from one of them, if it does not contain the phrase agenda or discussion topics or to be discussed, then it gets rejected. Now, I'm a little afraid to turn this on in my production environment because I very frequently get messages from customers asking me to have meetings. It would be rude and it would be counterproductive for me just to say, no, you didn't include an agenda, I won't talk to you. And I am such a noob with Power Automate, there's got to be a better way to do this, right? So I just mentioned this as a possibility. Maybe at Commsverse next year, I'll have a more polished version that I can show you, because I love the idea of being able to automate meeting related processes with Power Automate. I just don't know how to do it well enough to really make a convincing case that it is safe and smart to do it at this point. Another one of the Cortana services that Microsoft has really been pushing is part of Scheduler that will reserve what Microsoft calls focus time for you. Now, studies have shown that reserving time where you have uninterrupted time to do whatever your job is critically important, so that you don't have people interrupting you and you don't have a day when you go nonstop from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. So what Microsoft has done with Scheduler is they have an automated tool that will book focus time for you daily, and will also block out a week, or sorry, it's sort of week in review block of focus time for you to do weekly status stuff. And here are a couple of interesting things about the way this works. First, that focus time can float. So the service, if you tell it to book focus time, the service will book you the amount of time you specify, and it'll find open slots in your calendar every weekday. It might not be at the same time, depending on your schedule. The same with the weekly focus. So if my weekly focus this week is Wednesday from 3 to 4:30, next week it might be at that same time slot. It might be on Monday. It might be on Friday. The idea is that the service understands your calendar rhythms and can pick times to do things for you, so that you don't have to go to the mental effort of thinking, oh, okay, well, when should I do focus time? Then the idea behind focus time is that when your calendar shows that you are focusing, Teams will mark you as focusing and put you in do not disturb mode. Your calendar will automatically be blocked. So if you have time set to focus, people will not be able to come in and steal that time by double booking you. I mean, they still can, right? That's a problem we haven't even talked about, is how do you keep people from, being calendar thieves? But I've been using this feature since Microsoft started shipping it, and more often than not, it is helpful, right? Because we all need time when we're not in meetings for other people to do whatever our actual work is. Now, how do you know if any of this stuff is working? So I wish I had time to do a whole presentation just on my analytics, because there's a fascinating variety of things that it can tell you, many of which have to do with meetings. So you can see in the screenshot, it's saying I've got 58% of my time is free, available to focus, and 42% of my time is spent doing stuff with other people, 29% of which is meetings. Now here's the problem. If you look at this screenshot, I can tell you there is at least one thing that I know is completely wrong, and that is that I spent 0.7 hours working on Office documents. I mean, that's so far from reality, it's not even funny, because 80% of what I do, if I'm not talking on the phone to somebody, I'm working in an Office document. Those are the two things that I do all day, every day.
Hi, Paul. Sorry to interrupt. We're nearly up with the time, so if we can maybe start to wrap up, if we can, that'd be great.
Yep, the good news is this is actually the last slide, so I'll skip going through the live demo and just say that if you haven't played with my analytics, you should. The insights that it gives you are useful as long as you keep in mind that they are only as good as the data that Microsoft gathers. And so when you look at the statistics, you're going to have to sort of cross-check them against your own reality so that you know whether or not the input data they're using truly reflects what you've been doing. And so with that, I'll open the floor for questions.
Thank you, Paul. Just checking through the questions. Don't think we got any question. No questions yet. Attendees, if you have any questions, please don't be shy. Post them now, and I'll put the announcement in a sec where you can actually join the breakout meeting with Paul if you have any further questions, feedback, or anything that you would like to see regarding the session. We just wait a few seconds, then we can end the session, Paul.
Alrighty. I want to close by, you can see that I've got the familiar sponsor page up. I want to thank all the sponsors who made this event possible. You know, it was a long road to get here, and I hope that we can go back to doing this as a live event in the future. But I very much appreciate their support in making it possible for us to have this event at all.
Okay, well, great, Paul. Thanks very much. Really comprehensive presentation about the better meetings, and like you said, there's a lot of things to cover off and some good demo points. So I just want to say thanks for giving up your time and being here with Commsverse. Attendees, thanks very much for your time too. And we will be closing this session in a few seconds. I'm just going to post that link for you so that you can join the breakout meeting. There he goes, is in the chat window. Okay, great. Well, Paul, take care. Thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference. And
thank you, sir.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.